Live from our nation's capital, it's Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.
Welcome to Deadline DC. Every week on the show, we shine a bright light through the thick fog of utter chaos and complete confusion that envelops the United States like the sword of Damocles. I'm Brad Bannon. I'm a national Democratic and progressive strategist, a political analyst for News Radio KNX FM 97.1 on your dial in the City of Angels, and a weekly contributor to The Hill in Washington, D.C. Every week on Deadline DC, I talk to the people and players behind the politics and policies that drive our great nation forward, or at least keeps it from going backwards during Trump 2.0. We've got a fascinating show for you today. In the first half hour, our guest is the nationally known political analyst, Charlie Cook, to talk midterm madness. And then in the second half hour, Christine Wood, co-director of Declaration for American Democracy, reviews No King's Day on Saturday. Before we go to our first guest, Charlie Cook, we'll play this clip about Donald Trump's poll standing.
You know, I would say that this is the most troublesome sign that I have seen for the President of the United States and the Republican Party so far. What are we talking about? Well, let's take a look here. Voters on Trump and the cost of living. You go back when he was reelected back in October of 2024, he was beating Kamala Harris by 3 points on the cost of living, right? Look at his net approval rating now. Woo! Down underwater we go. His net approval at a record low, 41 points below water. You can't win when you're at 41 points below water on the cost of living. Kamala Harris couldn't win. The Democratic Party couldn't win. And I'm here to tell you that there's a better chance that I root for the New York Yankees than Donald Trump and the Republican Party winning when he's 41 points below water.
This was March 12th to March 16th. We could see even more, gas prices rise and prices go up in the coming days and weeks with the Iran war. So this number could get even worse. What about independence?
Yeah, what about independence? You think this 41 points below water is bad? Take a look at independence. It's even worse. I mean, 60 points underwater when it comes to Trump and the cost of living among independents. Again, a record low. You go back to October of 2024. He was winning on this issue over Kamala Harris by 11 points. Look at that switcheroo. That is a 71-point switcheroo in the wrong direction for Donald Trump when we're coming to the cost of living and independence. And this, my dear friends, is just a political nightmare waiting to happen for the Republican Party come the midterm election. Donald Trump and Republicans won in 2024 because of support from male voters. The only way they can win, given the gender gap in this country, is support from male voters. And male voters are abandoning Donald Trump. Take a look here. This gives the game away. Okay, Trump's standing with men. In November of 2024, he beat Kamala Harris among them by 13 points. Look at where he is now on his net approval rating. Down he goes. It's a 20-point shift away from Donald Trump. He is now 7 points underwater at this particular point among men. I think it is very difficult for Republicans to do well in this midterm cycle if Donald Trump is underwater with men. As my uncle once wrote, where the boys are, where the men are, they are underwater when it comes to Donald Trump.
Okay, so that's overall men, but what about young men who were really influential?
Yes, young men. Of course, there was a massive shift to Donald Trump from 2020 to 2024 among young men. And look right here. Whoa! Yikes, 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 yikes. Men under the age of 25 on Trump. He won him in 2024 by 5 points. Look where he is now. The net approval rating way down there. Down we go to negative 19 points. That's nearly, what is that? Nearly a 25-point switcheroo against the President of the United States when it comes to men under the age of 45. Those men that had switched their allegiances over to the Republican Party are seeing what the President is doing. They don't like what the President is doing, and they have very much soured on the President of the United States, men under the age of 45.
What is it?
That is Harry Endon from CNN talking about recent polling about Donald Trump. Our guest in this half hour is Charlie Cook, founder of the Cook Political Report and one of the nation's foremost political analysts. Charlie, welcome back to Deadline DC.
Thank you, Brad. Is Harry over caffeinated or what?
Yeah, it sounds that way, doesn't he? He's really excitable, which I guess is good for TV. Uh, what's your take on the midterm elections?
Well, I could do a whole segment just talking about what Harry said and how I disagreed with it. But anyway, and I'm not sure he would know a congressional district that bit him in the ass. But anyway, I think there's very little. I think Democrats are likely to have a very good election. Is it going to be a great one? Probably not. And the reason is in the House, there simply aren't enough vulnerable Republican seats to run up the kind of wave, numbers that people talk about for waves. So could they pick up, they only need 3 to pick up control of the House. Could they pick up 10? Yeah. 12, 15, maybe. Yeah. I think getting over 20, getting over the midterm average of 20 post-World War II of 26, probably not. But, these people talking about waves, they're ignoring districts, and they're ignoring the fact that most of that for Democrats to pick up more than say 30 seats requires getting people to vote Republican that haven't voted Republican since Moby Dick was a guppy.
Okay. Anyway, you feel good about Democrats picking up enough seats in the House to take control. Let's move over and talk about the Senate races. There are half dozen or so Senate races that appear to be competitive. Now, you made an interesting connection between the Senate race in Maine, where the incumbent is Susan Collins, a Republican, and the Senate race in Texas, where where there's a Republican incumbent, John Cronin. What's the connection between the two races?
If I'm a Democrat, well, I just flat out say Democrats in Texas and looking at Texas desperately want Ken Paxton to win the Republican nomination because they see him as beatable, and Cornyn probably isn't. But they would much prefer to see Paxton. That they've got so much more material to use against Ken Paxton. And I think it's the same in Maine, to be honest. If I'm a Republican, I would desperately want Graham Plattner because he would have so much more baggage than Janet Mills would. Mills against Collins. Oh, I think Mills would be very likely to win because I think that race would be about Donald Trump in a light blue state. But if it's Graham Plattner, it's going to be about Reddit posts and unfortunate things said and DUI and all kinds of things that I'm not sure that's what Democrats want to be talking about.
Okay, well, let's look at the primaries. What's your take on the Republican runoff primary in Texas between Ken Paxton, who is now the Attorney General, and incumbent Republican Senator John Cronin?
Yeah, well, Cornyn is I think he is, well, as I said a minute ago, probably unbeatable. But the thing is, in a primary or in a runoff where it's dominated by really conservative MAGA type people, that Paxton has a natural advantage. Now, briefly, right after the primary, it looked like President Trump was going to endorse Cornyn, but it now looks like he probably won't, and which means that Paxton has a big edge in the primary, and that or in the runoff, and Democrats would get the opponent they wanted. I still think it would be a tough race, but they would get. They'd get certainly the more vulnerable of the two Republicans if they got Paxton instead of Cornyn.
The Democratic candidate for the Senate in Texas is James Tallarico. What's your take on him?
I think he's a really smart, impressive guy. And in another state, well, in another state, he could do really, really well. Um, Being a pretty progressive guy representing Austin, that's not exactly the median point, center point of the state of Texas. And,
Charlie, I'm going to have to cut you off there so we can take a quick break. This is Deadline DC. We'll be right back after this quick break. My guest in this half hour is Charlie Cook, who is one of the nation's foremost political analysts. Charlie, you've been making occasional trips to Granite State to see presidential candidates as they move their way through. The most recent candidate you saw was Rahm Emanuel, the former mayor of Chicago and chief of staff at one point to President Barack Obama. Tell me about Rahm Emanuel.
Yeah, Rom, it's funny to see a presidential candidate that you knew when they were a DCCC staffer. It's kind of fun. Well, I've always known he was a really, really smart guy and strategically, tactically smart. But he was much smoother than I had ever seen him be. Very empathetic. I think, of the candidates that have wandered through New Hampshire or potential candidates, he and Cory Booker have been sort of the most impressive so far.
What impressed you about Emanuel?
Uh, he he is trying, if there's a place for a sort of pragmatic Democrat tough who isn't, quote, bad on the progressive side on issues, but would be not falling into the traps that progressives usually fall into. I think that would be it. But he came across as a great, good bit warmer than the guy we used to know back when he was a staffer at the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee.
I remember once, I think it was at a White House press dinner, President Obama made a joke about Emanuel, who was noted for his very hot temper back in those days. And he said, I have bad news for you. Rahm Emanuel had his middle finger amputated, and since then he's been speechless.
Yeah,
Uh,
actually, he lost it in high school working at a Arby's, I think it was. But yeah, it's kind of ironic that that's the finger or good piece of a finger that he lost. But yeah, no, I think you're going to have a really big field of Democrats and a lot to choose from. And we've got a long way to go before we know who's going to be the nominee.
Tell me, you also saw Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey. Your impressions of him?
I had seen him, a few years before when he was sort of poking around and running for president. He came across as more honest, more real, more. He clearly had just picked up. I mean, he was already a really bright guy, but um, you could just tell that he had jumped up a couple of levels in terms of candidate quality, and that compared with, let's say, I think the same week we saw Chris Murphy, a senator from Connecticut, who was passing through and who was obviously a smart guy, but just didn't have the polish that Booker had and didn't come across quite nearly as effective as Rahm did, for example.
Okay. One thing I thought was interesting about New Hampshire, the national polls on the Democratic presidential race in 28. And remember, we're really early in the process here. So poll numbers in a presidential race in 2028 are like sandcastles on a windy beach. They don't last for long. I did notice, though, in a recent New Hampshire poll I saw, Pete Buttigieg was the clear front runner in New Hampshire. Why is that, do you think?
Buttigieg, is that who
Yeah,
you said?
yeah.
Well, he spent more time there than anybody else. He worked it, I think, pretty hard back in, I guess that would have been 20, right? So I think he's, uh, I think he just has a head start, and he's also, he's a pretty polished guy. We watched him back that year campaigning, and he was very, very, very good. Frankly, I think he was probably a little too, people point to his sexual orientation, but I think, quite frankly, I think being more moderate than this, being sort of somewhat, well, less progressive than most other Democratic presidential candidates, I think is actually maybe a bigger liability for him. But he was very impressive.
Okay. Let's go back. I want to ask you a question about the midterms. As we see from that clip we played at the beginning, the president's approval ratings are pretty damn low. And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think we live in three countries. And in blue Democratic America, the president's job approval rating is about 5%, give or take a point or two, which is obviously, radioactive. Among independents, it's between 25 and 35, which is toxic. I mean, that's awful. But you get in among Republicans, it's in the 80s. Now, for Democrats to pick up more than, say, 2 Senate seats and to pick up more than, say, 20 House seats, they've got to be winning Republicans. And that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, in presidential voting, it's about 5% defection rate. In midterm elections, it's about 3 or 4% will vote for the other party. That's not, that just sort of doesn't happen. What happens is people of the president's party, if they're disappointed, if they're disillusioned, or if they're just not motivated, they stay home. But they're not likely to vote the opposite way. I mean, negative partisanship, if nothing else, where, you have so many partisans that hate the other party even more than they like their own party. And that keeps them from defecting. But there are no defections anymore in any meaningful numbers. And that's the cap I think on this cycle that keeps it from being the kind of fabulous cycle that you might expect that a president, that an opposition party would have when a president's got a job approval rating of, 41% or so overall.
Okay, let me ask you this question. What do Democrats need to do to get the most out of what they can get out of the midterms,
Well,
besides beating up Trump, of course?
yeah, I think it's going to be an allocation of resources. I mean, to be honest, I think it's unrealistic for them to try to get the third and the fourth seats these cycles, because it means going into really, really red places. I think they could take that money, put them in governor's races, put them in, attorney general race. I mean, they could put it all around and be trying to win races in purple states and drive out the few remaining Republican candidates in blue states and districts. I think that would be money considerably well spent. I mean, but you look down into state offices, the Democratic Party has not recovered from the Obama presidency. I mean, they haven't been back. They haven't caught back up from what was lost in state House and state Senate seats, back when Obama was president. And when, Republicans were investing a lot more money and winning down ballot. And the thing is, that's your farm team. That's your seed corn for the future. And
Charlie, unfortunately, I have to cut you off here because we're at the end of the segment. I want to thank very much Charlie Cook, one of the nation's foremost political analysts, for joining us today on Deadline DC. We're going to take a quick break, then come back with our next guest, Christine Wood, who's the co-director of Democracy Declaration for American Democracy, to talk about No King's Day. We'll be right back after this message.